one of the other things you've noted is, what are we moving towards? And so that makes me wonder also with school and some other things, when so many things are adjusting due to safety measure, not because we necessarily are choosing, but because we're being informed by scientists, politicians, our jobs, our communities, by so many external forces, that, you know, it's better if we do this, it's better if we don't do this, etc., that it feels like, what's the point in planning? And trying to figure out, also, it may not feel safe to plan. Like, you may want to go on a trip to a safe dynamic, right? Like as safe as COVID, like whatever your COVID risk barometer is, right? And finding that it's like, well, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe we just don't plan and we just kind of go through things. How can we navigate that when it feels like part of planning allows us to move towards something, as well as give a sense of not control, but a sense of forward trajectory, right? Like, I've planned this for when, right? And as we just previously talked, sometimes we need markers, right? Like, we're going on this trip and I can work and get through this until this happens. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but think we're coming up on a holiday season that's very significant for folks, not like often our spring holidays, which tend to be more nuclear family. If at all celebrated, they might be big, they might not. Whereas our fall and winter holidays tend to be very community driven, and planning may feel not just pointless, but a great loss. So how do we navigate that within our COVID safety barometer, and understanding that planning used to be a part of how we processed?
Yeah, that I think of all the statements that you gave to me, or questions that you gave to me, is probably the hardest one. The blurring together and the that one's difficult, I think, because it's so present day to day. But you know, I certainly hear what you're talking about with those events that we have come to depend on to give us some sense of safety, or some sense of aspire to, or some sense of this is what we always do. You know, the churches that I've worked in, you know, we always do the offering after the sermon. We never do the offering before the sermon. And then some churches are, you know, we never do the offering after the sermon. We always do the offering before the sermon, because you don't want the preacher to feel like, you know, that you're paying for whatever they gave them that day, and whatever that is. All sorts of just fun liturgical worshipy things that come in are about always and never. You know, until I moved to Denver, I always had Christmas Eve at my mother's house. And we've been here 15 years. And we were able to make it once or twice in those 15 years. And so our always had to change. When we were in seminary, we always, you know, my wife and I, after we got married, for the first 5 or 6 years, always alternated important holidays between our families. So Thanksgiving with one, Christmas with the other. 5 years into marriage, we got tired of driving that much between that space, so we started to have Friendsgiving. So every Thanksgiving we would meet with friends who couldn't go with their family, and we would just do our own thing. And you know, that's a tradition that's carried on for 20 years now. And so, you know, and it'll be different this year, because you know, our friends do different things with the COVID news than we do. and there's issues of safety and issues of concern, and uh, that goes with issues of nostalgia and issues with knowing what's fun and what we enjoy and what's ritual and routine and habitual in many spaces. And it'll be something, it'll be a change that we grieve and that we mourn in many ways. And that we'll just have to try to figure out when we get there, which is the difficult part. I was listening to what you were saying a little bit ago, and what kind of stuck out to me and what continues to kind of rummage around in the back of my head, and this is something I'm as guilty of as anybody, is the overuse of the term normal. We use it to describe people. We use it as something to aspire to, people who have mental health concerns aspire to have a normal mental life. People who, we have difficulty with people with physical disabilities or differences because they don't feel normal to us. People who don't work 9-to-5 jobs don't have normal employment. Dads who stay at home with kids while wives work have an abnormal family situation. All these things that we do to make ourselves feel safe is behavior that's around normalizing rather than recognizing difference. And so the curiosity for me that comes out of that, and just in what you were talking about marking this time specifically, is how do we recognize and embrace difference rather than seek to hold people to a kind of arbitrary stance of what's normal. That I need to return to this. I need to do this for this to feel like me. Rather than recognizing that we are in so many ways gifted with adaptability and gifted with creativity and imagination and empathy and relationship to be able in whatever moment we're in to do the best next kind of right thing in that moment, but as best as we can, knowing that sometimes that's just really not very good, but it's good enough to get us through things. And so the curiosity that comes out of here, especially as we begin to mark holidays and begin to do those things that are really culturally significant. And I mean that like inter-family and intra-family, is how do we understand the difference of this time and learn to find ways to celebrate the difference of this time together, and do it with some sense of this doesn't have to be forever. Just because you do it one time doesn't mean that this is what it's going to be like all the time. We probably will have a Zoom Christmas this year. And if that's the case, that doesn't mean that every year from now on it will be a Zoom Christmas. We will probably have a Zoom Friendsgiving where we sit around the table and eat together over Zoom with a couple other families that we might generally do things with, that will remind us both of what's important to us, but also remind us of what we've lost. And at the same time, will be different, and we will probably hope not to do it again if we don't have to.
Sure.
And so, I don't know that I'm kind of getting to where you are, or the question that you're asking, especially around plans and around, predictability, because we're really in a space where, and you and I talked about this a little bit, that the greatest thing that we can predict is the unpredictability of what comes next. The best thing that we can plan for is that plans will change. And we can be completely certain that we are uncertain what next week will look like. We've just as a parent, we've gone from, I think in May, surveys about hybrid school, online school, or all in-person school, to no information about school, to we're going to go back full-time in person to school within a week. We are going to go full-time online for the first 2 weeks of school. To a week later, we are going to go full-time virtual school through mid-October. And so, we will plan for that. And really what we're planning for is full-time virtual school through the end of the year at the very least. And more than likely, probably a full year of virtual school.
Yeah.
Because the unpredictability is what we can plan for.
Yeah.
In many ways.
One of the things that, as I was thinking of our conversation collectively, the opportunity to creatively create new plans, right? So we may have previous plans that are around holidays. We always did it this way, or we always did it that way. One of the things that, I've had to grapple with, I think early on in March, I was like, oh, Julian's first year of life is going to look very different than we had anticipated. Almost as like I'm going to plan for the worst, but it's not really going to get there. Like, it'll be better before his first birthday. And now I'm like, oh, our holidays are going to not be in the ways that my nieces and nephews' first holidays were. And yet that had been, and there is a bit of grief to that. And I'm sure I'll feel it when it actually happens. But as I was hearing you talk, Jason, one of the things that really came to mind was, how can we use this for the things that we typically wouldn't get to do? So how, not having to split holidays, how do we really just soak up the fact that we get to maybe do whatever maybe we go camping, maybe we do something that's, within our COVID safety measures of exploration,
right.
But we wouldn't typically get to do that if we had relatives in, or we were going to relatives. And based off of our other conversations, I get to also acknowledge when grief happens, acknowledge if I'm evading it, approaching it, or engaging it. And I also have the chance to mark it in different ways. And so I think when it comes to planning, we can plan for whatever may be, knowing that it can change. And if it changes, we have these skills to be able to mark the disappointment, to mark the frustration. I mean, just you talking about schooling, I can imagine that it felt exhaustive and hopeful and frustrating, depending on what the news was. And maybe all at the same time, when you heard you were going back, the kids were going back full-time in person, it may have been a sigh of relief that they would be not in the house for the first time in 5 months, as well as like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when schools are open full-time, and how is that going to work?
How are they going to do that? Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think one of the things when you know about creativity is a chance for us to explore things that weren't normal, whatever that was, right? As well as acknowledging that if we really looked back at what was normal, we may not have liked it, but we knew how to engage it. And I think that's a big difference, to acknowledge we may not know how to play this game right now of having, as my grad students would say, we're pivoting a lot. Like, you're asking us to pivot regularly, to use your word, adaptability, and allowing for the space to go, I feel like I don't want to adapt again today. Or I'm almost wondering, so one of my colleagues who, from my first church job, she was is an introvert. I am not. And so she gave me this really helpful phrase of, I've hit my word count for the day. Or I'm almost at my word count for the day. So if I'd walk into her office and know that what I was about to bring up could potentially be very energy draining, I'd go, where are we at in word count? Like, are we at the start of it? Are we starting to deplete it? Do I need to come back tomorrow? And I think when it comes to our adaptability, we almost need to have a word count version of that. I'm done adapting for today, knowing that we may actually still need to adapt, but naming that I'm done with this for today. And then knowing that we have tomorrow and being able to engage it in those ways, because I think when we got, like, one of the things we may long for how things were is that we knew how much energy it took from us, and we knew how to get through, and we knew how to prepare. And when we can't plan, when we don't have our rituals, when we don't have our habits, when we don't have our buffers, it can feel like we constantly don't know what's coming our way. Yeah. And we don't know how to engage, or, wow, I thought I had energy and I didn't, or why did that hit me harder than I thought it would? And so our whole conversation's making me think around the ways that we can explore and dream and navigate around ourselves. Yeah. The world around us is a state of, I don't even know if we'd call it controlled chaos, but it often feels chaotic.
Sure.
And it often feels like it could be forced upon us, like it is coming at us versus us engaging it. And part of that is the safety measures. When you're at home, it creates that actual barrier, right? And being able to really have this be a chance to explore who we are, to explore how we feel, and to explore what our individual friends, families, engagement, exploration, creativity can be. And not to make it all roses, like, oh, look at how wonderful it is that we get to create all these things. Yeah. But to say, oh man, we've been thrown for a loop. Yeah. How can we re-engage? Yeah. And what does that look like? And so that leads me to our final question, which is
before you hit there, just really
sorry,
quick,
Jason.
I was going to say, no worries. When you were talking, it sparked an image in my head of just thinking about, if you have a favorite book that you've read over and over again that just sits on your nightstand, and it cover to cover, and you go back to it because it's meaningful, and it just keep reading it over and over again. And someone has, comes in the middle of the night and takes the pages out but leaves the cover there and inserts an entirely new book in the same old cover. And you open it up expecting the same familiar pages, and you start to read, and all of a sudden there's this brand new book. And we have a choice. We have a choice to continue reading and seeing what's there. We have a choice to be mad that the whole book's changed. We have a choice to be really sad that, we just stare at the cover of the book and long for those old pages that used to be there. Or just have the opportunity to maybe just read it one page at a time and see what's different. And, part of it is giving ourselves permission. That was the other thing that came to mind as you were
Mm,
talking there, that this is a,
mhm,
this can be a time of good permission giving,
mm,
permission to assess, was this actually a helpful ritual to do? Was
mhm,
this really meaningful to me? What would be different that could be important? What might be on the next page of that book?
mhm,
This was interesting, this was
mm,
not interesting. And
mhm,
to assess and take some time to understand our intentions about
mhm,
what was previously meaningful to us
mhm,
in ways that allow us to keep some of those things that are worth embracing,
mhm.
and then embrace what we might fill in the rest of the time with out of
Mhm.
what we're learning in this space. A lot of
Right,
creativity comes from difficult situations.
right.